For this album, I wanted to take on this challenge of taking all the major influences of my musical life and kind of bring them all together because I realized how unique and odd it was. So I was born, and raised in a Southern Baptist gospel church, and the only other music we listened to, of course, was like R&B and soul. So I thought, is it possible to take all the music genres that I love and feel like I really relate to the most and bring that into the medicine world? Yeah, and I'm super, super happy with it.
Welcome to another episode of A Path Unfolding. I'm your host, Jesse Brede, and I'm here today with Tony Moss. Tony Moss is an ayahuasca practitioner and a world-class musician. I know you're being an advocate and much else. One of the things that in my research was your mother being part of this group called the Stovall Sisters.
Yes.
And the musical family that you're from. Let's talk about that.
It's an interesting kind of a legacy. There was this documentary some years ago. The title was something like 10 Feet from Fame or something like that. And my mom was alive when that came out. And we commented on how many people have had that experience, that she and her sisters were very well known and kind of sought after backup singers for a lot of major talent. And a lot of people hear her voice and their voices all the time and don't realize that it's and she said, yeah, it was that way for us, like we love what we were doing. People in the industry knew who we were, but the world at large did not know who they were. Yeah, and the song that most people are hearing her on is Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky. Every time they get to that part, Spirit in the Sky, that's her voice and her sister singing. So eventually, through Warner Reprise, they released the Stovall Sisters album, and it was the first kind of gospel funk soul crossover, right? And at the time, I think it definitely had some, followers, I would say, the term we would use today. But it wasn't like some major success. Now it's one of the number one collectible items or albums, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because now it's always in hindsight. It was kind of groundbreaking, and the song that she wrote called "Hang On In There" was like this dance hall hit in all over Europe. Um, it's kind of this like funk revival thing that was happening there at the time, right? And it was a cousin of mine that found that out and told me about it, and I was like, "You're kidding, right?" Because I had kind of long since forgotten about that part of my life when my cousin told me. And then I thought, well, this is great. My mom, they deserve to get some recognition and royalties. And then this interesting thing happened. I contacted my mom and I said, is your union, your PRO, are they tracking everything? And she's like, huh?
Oh.
I was like, Mom, I was shocked. They hadn't joined BMI or ASCAP.
Wow.
Because they grew up in a time when that was just, as you know, so many artists were taken advantage of then. So I embarked upon this year of like doing all this legwork and basically got them all situated, contacted who I needed to. And they said, well, we can only go back so far, so they did. But I remember them getting checks in the mail. And this aunt, it was so funny. She said at some point, like they were looking at the table, she was like, there's like $17,000 on this table, right? And they were just that moment of them being so excited made it completely worth it because bringing it back to me, I didn't realize it at the time, but they were instrumental. I mean, growing up with that music as the backdrop to my life, like it's osmosis, put my life in a course. I had no idea. I really had no idea what a role it was going to play and how influential it was going to be.
Wow.
Yeah.
A little bit more would be you've been a vocal coach and you led a children's choir.
The International Children's Choir.
Wow.
There have been, obviously many choir directors. I think I could be wrong. I think it was like 2 or 3 years that I did that. And they were based in Long Beach at the time. And I was living there. That was a fantastic experience. I took that job because I was kind of, those actors going in and out of work. I was kind of at a low point. I loved working with kids. Right out of high school, I started working with kids, teaching as an independent contractor within the school district. It was something called like learning through music or dance or something like that. I don't remember. But I was basically teaching problem solvings, but using choreography and theater as a way of doing it. Yeah, it was miraculous. And somehow, because of that connection, one of those kids, I think, was part of the International Children's Choir. And they needed a director. I got contacted. I went and met with them and fell in love, and it was fantastic. Yeah, I went to Switzerland with them and Mexico and lots of different places. I don't remember. Some in the domestic things in the United States, but those were like two really memorable trips. Yeah, and I was a vocal coach, and it was for like advanced students. I was not a coach that could take someone from like not being able to sing at all to being a singer, but I was a very good coach for somebody who could sing already and was going to the next level. I just my brain just clicked and worked well in that area.
Got it.
So I had a lot of really cool, like talented kids that had gone to like Waldorf and Montessori schools, right? Yeah, which I just really related to. Yeah.
So there's that, and then let's talk a little bit about the medicine music and medicine work that you do, just to lay the foundation as we go into talking about your new album.
It's
Duality.
yeah, instrumental. So now maybe 28, 9, 30 years ago, a couple of friends of mine and I got invited to an ayahuasca ceremony. And at the time we all said, like everybody did at the time, like, I what? Like I'd never heard of it. And the friend said to me, "Oh, it's going to be like this movie, Emerald Forest." And I had just seen that film and I thought, "Oh, great. We're going to be out in the jungle, forest, finding our spirit animal." So I went and it was nothing like that. It turned out to be the Santo Daime, which is a Judeo-Christian church out of Brazil. Had I known that, it would have been fine, but because I didn't, it was such a shock that I just kind of like rejected the whole experience and had a really challenging time. Swore I'd never go back. 2 weeks later, we were back because I was kind of curious. I'll try it again. And the rest was history. Yeah, it completely transformed my life. Yeah, I had no idea ever that I would end up leading, but eventually opportunities to lead ceremonies and study with people in Peru and, well, at this point, yeah, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, and Colombia. Yeah.
For reference, I've sat with you in ceremony, and it's changed my life. It's given me a newfound relationship with my spirituality and source, spirit, God. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. It was very, Bible Belt, very pushy of, Judeo-Christian beliefs, very judgmental if you didn't buy into that, and really developed a bad relationship with religion and kind of, as an aside, also spirituality. But sitting with you, sitting with Bird Tribe has been this transformational experience for me, and it's awakened all of these different things inside of me, as you know, and it's just been a blessing. So one, I just wanted to personally thank you for that and all the gifts and all of the work that you've put into and all these travels and studies, because I know they're not easy. And to kind of tie into the music, which for me is such a critical part of the ceremony, and having not sat in traditional ceremonies, I only know sitting with you.
Right.
And so I've started to learn about the Icaros and the Lakota Indians and all the traditions that you bring into the space. That's been so eye-opening. And the only kind of relationship that I have as a DJ, the fact that I can play house music and drum and bass and Afrobeat and down tempo all in one night, and how I think that's much more of an enriching DJ set, and how we have like the world's music is available to us. You are programming the nights with all of, to me, like many of the world's sacred ancient traditions and music, and then also your own, which to me I feel like is a much richer experience. And I know that some of what you've talked about is sort of bringing in, taking the woo out of the ceremony. And one of the first times I sat with you, you kind of talked about some of the science and the physiological things that were happening in the body, which really put me at ease. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about the programming of the music and how much you've worked on that and developed that.
I think so. One of the things that is unique about the neo-shamanic ayahuasca tradition, and early on people would have a problem with that title, but that's exactly what it is. It's new shamanism, in that it's usually referring to people that have studied the indigenous traditional technology of ceremony, but also are bringing in modern contemporary understandings about what's happening. Everything from epigenetics to neurobiology, and all of it gets combined, and even what we understand about mental health and practices around that. So it becomes this I call it psychotherapeutic work, actually, and certainly it's spiritual work. But big quotation marks around spiritual. I spent a good part of my life looking at what does that even mean. But the bottom line is, I always say that ayahuasca meets you where you're at. If you are a very spiritual, quote unquote, woo-woo person, and you're there to meet ascended masters, and yeah, that's probably going to show up, and it will be meaningful and it will be powerful. You could be completely uninterested in that and be an atheist and be just interested in the psyche and how it works. And yeah, the ayahuasca is going to meet you there and take that foundation to another level. So I just learned early on that the role of a ceremony, the neo-shamanic ones, is to really just create a container, we like to call it, so that the medicine can do that, so that it can work, and for each person. And people often say, they're like, oh, medicine. Well, it is medicine. It's medicine in that, again, it is psychotherapeutic in that it works for the body, mind, and spirit. Adaptogenic in the sense that, again, it's going to kind of meet you wherever you're at the time. Some people come in and have really deep cathartic healing experiences and will tell me 6 months later, I'm completely healed from my trauma or anxiety. I'm off meds. I'm not, no longer depressed. Other times, it's just one very simple insight, like call your father and heal this one thing. And they'll tell me 6 months later, oh, my entire family relationship has changed. My doing that one thing was a catalyst for the entire thing to kind of unfold. So yeah, it's such beautiful work, and it's rewarding. And whenever we are blessed enough to be invited to lead ceremonies, and I always say publicly, legal ceremonies where they can happen. The rest of the time, we are Bird Tribe on Spotify, and we're making medicine music, right? We'll talk about what that is. But yeah, so the music in that, getting more specific to your question, when I studied with the Shipibo, the thing that most struck me was we were asking him about the Icaros, and he said, well, this is a direct translation, but from Quechua. He said, we acknowledge that ayahuasca is the true healer, however, the true shaman. However, the Icaros tell it where to go, what to do. And I was like, whoa. I think it really struck me because in that moment, another thing happened with that. But I thought, yeah, it doesn't have to be an Icaro, but that is the job of the music. It is to set the tone, and well done and understood. It's a catalyst for the experiences that happen in ceremony. Yeah, we have it really refined, like of where we start. It quite literally the ship kind of launching. You want to get everybody comfortable, and it's kind of elated, and it's good feelings. And now that we have your attention, let's drop into that shadow work. Let's do those things that we know are uncomfortable, but it's really what you're here for. And you don't want to stay there so long, right? And then the music can also lift you out of those places. And yeah, so over years of just paying attention and being sensitive, we really started to understand what music was doing where, right? Not just what music, but at particular places in the journey, which is true of any plant medicine or psychedelic work. Like if you really understand what the music's doing, it can make or break a trip, right? Or a session. Yeah, so I thought I was giving up music completely in theater to do this work with ayahuasca, and lo and behold, it came completely back, and I was like, whoa, music is it. Like I was born for this, right? Yes. I understand it. I love doing it. And I never would have thought that I'd be able to combine those two aspects of my two passions, right, into something that works so harmoniously.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's where so much of the magic happens in life for people, when you can take two skill sets or passions, and then when they connect, that's where something really unique starts to happen, right? Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's take that and the vast amount of work that you've done, and then talk about I Am Life Music. This is your record label. Many of the members of Bird Tribe have released music with you and put that out. Let's talk about how that joined and what some of the goals and purpose of that, and then we'll jump into the album.
Like a lot of artists these days, I can honestly tell you, you know way more about what it means to be a label than I do. We became a label just because we were doing something really unique and it had to be released under something. So we had this, what we wanted to do was create what we called a public face of the ayahuasca aspect and plant medicine, psychedelic aspect of our community. A place where other people could come and have this same community connecting ceremonial ish experience without substances there because they're illegal and because a lot of people are afraid of them, understandably. So we started doing these events and we modeled it after the same structure of a ceremony. There was an invocation in the beginning. Sacrament was replaced with cacao, which was also a sacred beverage, and heart opening, as you know. And and it would be the same type of music that one would encounter in ceremony. However, it was amplified and geared more towards performance. And after a couple of those events, we realized it was working. That because people were reporting back that they were having, the same kind of cathartic experiences at these live public events as some people were reporting having in ceremony. So we were rolling along. We got to the point where we were doing 4 of those a year, pretty major. They eventually took on the title of Soul Circles, and they got really large. And the pandemic happened, like with everyone else. And so those came to a halt. And we decided during that time period, or I did, that, well, what we can definitely continue doing is the music. So I Am Life, the title, moved from being a production company to the music label, basically. And I joked before, like, I don't even know what a label really is. And in a lot of sense, a lot of people don't, as you know, because what has happened is it doesn't mean what it used to. The music industry has changed so much. But, we wanted to release the Bird Tribe album, and it's like, oh, it should be on a label. Well, let's just use I Am Life. We'll make a label. So really, just as I'm filling out the metadata for, our distributor, Symphonic, which we actually met through you, I put in I Am Life. So now we're a music label, but really in some ways only in name only. I've kind of had to like reverse engineer. I'm like, wait, what should we be doing? So basically the label is really their role. In the past, it would have been to, A&R find talent, develop talent, and to do all the things necessary to market the talent and unfortunately rip off the talent.
Yeah.
Right? So because it was mostly us, I thought, well, what we can definitely do is market and promote to the medicine music world, basically, at least to the degree that we have, contact with it. So that's how the label came about. And I just quickly realized that I love the public events, of course, but the feedback we started getting from the recorded music was in some ways overwhelming, only in the sense that it was unexpected. Yeah, I was getting messages from people all over the world saying something like this. It was to 2 songs, particularly Grateful, which you're very familiar with, and another Come to Me Yet. Now, of course, newer songs on the album. But I would get these messages saying, hi, hello, you don't know me, but I stumbled across your song, Come to Me Yet, or Grateful on the internet, and it just really gripped me. And now I've listened to it every morning or all day long, and it completely pulled me out of my grief or my depression. And I was like, what? And the reason why that was so impressive to me was that these songs were produced and offered in the context of what we're calling medicine music, which we want to define. So to find out that people were receiving it that way, that weren't connected to ceremony, it was really kind of mind-boggling to me. So I just knew that I wanted to kind of focus more on the production and releasing and marketing of music.
Yeah. Your song Grateful has greatly touched my life. I played it at my mother's memorial twice. And after that, through the processing of the grief, I wake up to it on my phone. And then after I meditate, I play that song and I write my gratitude list. And it's It's medicine.
It is medicine, and not only that, the practice you brought up is medicine. I mean, my kind of central message to people most of the time, in a lot of ways, it's underappreciated and misunderstood. I mean, first of all, if you think about it, like, how would you even define what that is? Actually, gratitude. You know, if I said, you know, put gratitude into words, like, and you're like, it's like, well, yeah, it's really something that is a deep feeling. It's like love, you know, when you're in it, right? And we all recognize it, but it is something also that you can conjure up and that you can contemplate. And I am kind of famous for saying that if you look closely, the answer to most of our so-called problems is actually just gratitude, because that was my own lived truth, you know. Um, People would question that occasionally and say, you know, yeah, that might not be true if you're in a refugee camp. And I'm like, uh, yes and no, actually. I go, first of all, I'm talking to a very, you know, privileged, um, earned or not, first world, you know, audience, you know, and most of the people that we would meet in ceremony or other contexts, I would have to remind them, I'm like, you're amongst some of the most privileged people on the planet, at least by the metric that we use for that in the West, you know. And one of the first things you can do with that is to be grateful, you know, because most of you, if any of us actually earned that, right? It was something that we were born into or circumstances. And the second is put it into service in some way, you know. And the Institute of Heart Math, amazing organization. You know, some people have questioned their science, but you know, it's kind of ancient what it is that they are exploring and very legitimately, I think, kind of presenting to the world as possibilities. And this idea that what we're calling, I think a lot of people, the aura is this electromagnetic field that surrounds the human body. And it turns out that our emotional states get encoded into this field. And they're saying that's why, you know, possibly that you can tell when, you know, someone's, you know, you're sitting there and you look because you think someone's looking at you and they are. And they said it's also why we can read people immediately, like when they walk into the room, because those fields meet longer or much sooner, right, than we actually, you know, start to put spells on each other. And so they say, but they're also interacting with this planetary electromagnetic field. So they've done all these research and experiments, and it's like basically it comes down to their hypothesis and, you know, possibility they present is that when we are in states of, you know, joy and gratitude and love, that's what we're feeding the field. You know, that's what we're collectively offering. You know, and there's been these amazing meditative type experiments where they've got 1,000 people in a particular city to agree to meditate at the same time in the same day, same hour. Yeah. And the crime rate, boom, drops down for this time period. And it's been qualitatively proven, right? Yeah. So I just looked at it and I thought, I'm no scientist and we don't know to what degree this is completely true. However, it is our lived experience. We've all had experiences of that feeling true. It intuitively made sense to me. And I was having deep experiences with it in my own life with the work that I was doing. Yeah, so I wrote Grateful because of that. You know, basically, it was like, this is not just a feel good, you know, panacea kind of thing. It's actually technology that can actually transform your life.
Right.
Two, going back to what you said, to wake up in the morning, whether you write it down or not, and just, you know, put your feet on the ground and just be like, okay, I'm thankful. Here's another day. I am thankful that I'm healthy and I'm safe. I'm not in a war zone. I'm thankful for, and the list can go on and on and on, you know. And my good friend Miranda, I share this often, you know, we were once in a group and she said, next time you're looking for something to be grateful for, just take your next breath. Right. And I was like, okay, my teachers are spoken, right?
Yeah.
Because she's absolutely right. You know, there is even in the midst of, I think, all of our so-called problems and challenges, most of them self-induced, you know, or results of the culture that we live in and capitalism, you know, not a judgment, just what it is. You can always find the thing to be grateful for. Yeah, for sure. And it changes your perspective on like your whole day or worldview, honestly. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for that song. I'm grateful to be here with you today. Well, let's talk about the album. Let's talk about
Yeah.
this chapter of your life and this broadening of your musical offering. And the album is called Joy.
Yeah.
Last night, I got to attend the album listening party at Naval in Los Angeles. Double Blind was a co-presenter.
Yeah.
Being there with your community and that community was really inspiring to see people show up. One, just to support you and the excitement they have for your music, and I was like, yes, yes, and just that there's people out there doing this work and working on themselves and taking some of a similar path to what I'm experiencing right now in my life, and that's really special. And I thought that the album was really well received, and I'd just love to jump in. Let's talk about like some of the influences and where you're coming from musically, and we can talk about some songs specifically too.
Yeah. It's a monumental moment for me personally for this reason. Um, when I when the kind of impulse came to want to pursue a more spiritual life, and I said that earlier. This word spirituality. I would consider myself just very modern mystic, right? I have always been fascinated by the nature of our existence, like period, and it's been a good part of my adult life just exploring and kind of researching and wanting to understand that from spiritual, scientific, and philosophical perspectives. Just like, what is it? Because I'm just one of those people that had, for whatever reason, growing up, moments of suddenly realizing how friggin' amazing it was. Like, how is this even possible? Right?
What are the odds?
Yeah, and it kind of it started one night by laying flat on my back, and I was in Long Beach, and I was looking up at the sky, and for the first time ever, it's those things we take for granted for good reason because we grew up with it. I was just absolutely dumbfounded that the moon was floating in space. And then it dawned on me like, oh wait, I'm on a rock floating in space. And in fact, I'm not looking up. I'm looking down, and that freaks me out. How does that work? Gravity, right? And what is that? And science can't even tell us still. So yeah, my brain just suddenly these synapses took off, and my neural network woke up. Yeah, that's the way I kind of felt like. And suddenly I was on fire with wanting to just kind of understand the nature of reality. And that is actually what mysticism is, despite what people think it is. And of course, there are lots of derivatives and a lot of occult, but so is Christianity and Catholicism and every other world religion.
True.
There's cultish aspects of it, right? Yeah, so I would just say that I'm a mystic. So I thought when that happened that, oh, well, I'm going to give up this pursuit in music and theater because that's all ego, and I'm no longer interested in that. Wrong. Life always has other plans, and the work with plant medicines and psychedelics, which I've done only a very limited experience with, by the way, psychedelics. I was fortunate enough to be introduced to plant medicines and psychedelics in a psychotherapeutic spiritual context. So I kind of bypassed the tripping. I later did some, but by then, once you have that context for it, even that becomes like, if nothing else, self-inquiry. Yeah, so those experiences actually brought music front and center. And I just realized like, no, I'm a born artist. I grew up living and breathing it. I express myself most fluidly and probably accurately in a more poetic format. So I decided like, actually, yeah, music, I want to return to it. So it was all ceremony music, which was beautiful. Grateful, Come to Me, as I mentioned, a few other songs. And the Birds in Paradise album came with Bird Tribe. And I was very aware during those recording and production processes that my idea of medicine music, the songs and the music needed to be contained in my head at the time, to make sure that they would be recognizable and received within the genre of medicine music and people that know what that is, right? So for this album, I just, we all mature rapidly or not. I'm always a very late bloomer and everything. I just thought, actually, I think this time around, I'm just an artist first. Meaning, I can't help but to write lyrics and receive artistic inspiration from the ceremony space at this point. However, how that gets produced, how it gets creatively expressed is the sky's the limits. So for this album, what I wanted to do, because I don't know that I would ever do another one, um, I wanted to take on this challenge of taking all the major influences of my musical life and kind of bring them all together because I realized how unique and odd it was. So I was born, and raised in a Southern Baptist gospel church, and the only other music we listened to, of course, was like R&B and soul. Then I discovered pop music really through the Commodores. Oh my God, I love the Commodores and Lionel Richie. And then I discovered my coming of age was the Parliament Funkadelic with George Clinton, right? It was the first concert I ever went to was with my mom. That was to see the Commodores. Second concert ever I got to go to on my own as like a teenager was George Clinton, the Parliament Funkadelic tour with the Mothership, right? And I was just like, mesmerized during that show. They were like my heroes.
Wow.
So I had this. The funny thing is, psychedelics, even what they were, was not on my radar at all. There I was at the very heart of this, like, which I later found out was this Black psychedelic culture and movement, and I was all in it, just signed me up. So it's a bit of a foreshadowing. And then I did musical theater for, like 12 years professionally. So that was a major influence. And of course, the music that comes out of the psychedelic world. And through all of that, I was very interested in hearing really beautiful progressive jazz, everything from Duke Ellington to Miles Davis, the pantheon or spectrum of jazz. So I thought, is it possible to take all the music genres that I love and feel like I really relate to the most and bring that into the medicine world? And I contacted my producer, Johnny, sent him the original demo for one of the songs, and we took off. And we certainly worked together, but he did this masterful job of taking this, which you got to hear last night, very distinct varieties of music, but making them all cohesive. The thing that he goes, well, the thing that's going to tie them together certainly is my voice and my lyrical writing style. Like, yeah. And he did several things to make all the songs kind of land in the same world, even though they're like different continents and countries in that world. Yeah, and I'm super, super happy with it.
Yeah, that's no small feat. Like that, to take those musical worlds and what we heard, and again, the programming and the pacing of the songs and how it delivers, like I'm fascinated by the programming of albums, right? And sort of, again, how it ties into ceremony. And
in some ways, just to interject, it's almost a lost art. I'm fascinated. I was always fascinated by it too. Since in the digital era of music, albums are no longer necessary.
Yeah.
Right? People can just, regardless of your album, they've just heard just one or two songs that they like and maybe only want to listen to that. Yet here we are creating what we call a concept album. Joy was designed to be listened to from beginning to end. And I was like, it was written that way because the lyrics start to loop and refer and it takes you on a journey. Because I understand music in terms of a journey, story, arc, and all, just the structure of storytelling, that's the kind of album I wanted to make.
Yes. Yeah. And I think in the end, that's much more rewarding, both for you as an artist, obviously, but for the listener, right? And so I am championing people to take the time to, and I think that's why vinyl maybe is having a resurgent too, that taking it out.
I've thought about this and I 100% agree. I think people always, I see occasionally some guy, thinking he's offering something interesting into the conversation, talking about whether or not vinyl really sounds better than digital. And I don't think he realizes for audiophiles, that's not the point, right? It is because it is something tangible. If you love a music, like one of my favorite albums, like everybody else up there, What's Going On, of course, Marvin Gaye, but Fleetwood Mac just like rocked my world, Rumors, right? So to actually hold that vinyl, that album is like a time capsule. You're holding a documentation not only of that body of music, but also a part of your life, right? It's not ephemeral floating in the cloud, it's yours. Yeah, and you actually put it on. And as you brought up, the thing that's really cool is you're hearing it from beginning to end as it was intentionally designed by the artist,
right,
or the label. Yeah, and so I love vinyl mainly for that reason. It's not about the sound for me because I'm not somebody that can really tell the difference,
Yeah.
right? Um, but there is this beautiful, warm feeling about the direct connection of you actually playing the music.
Yeah.
Like you put the needle on and you sit back. It's amazing. You
Yes.
know.
The physicality of it, the intentionality of it, the meditative, like this is what we're doing. And you're not just like, okay, algorithm, show me
Exactly.
what you got, which is also fun and great and beautiful for discovery. But, and also for me, like I love to support an artist by buying their vinyl.
That's
And
what I, you know,
it's a
here's the
vote with
funny
your
thing about
dollar.
me. After saying what I just shared, I actually don't own a turntable. And the reason simply is that when I decided that I really wanted to build an album collection, so first of all, when my dad passed away, I inherited this amazing vinyl collection of all the music that he grew up with that I didn't know at the time with the music that I would absolutely love. And the house that was in caught on fire like 10 years ago.
Mm,
Yeah, so I lost it all.
mm,
Then I still, so I'm like, oh, and my goal was to, of course, get a turntable for all of that. But then once that was lost, now I have no reason to buy a turntable.
mm.
But I still love this idea. If it's an artist that I absolutely love, like Fabiano Nadu, who's on my album, anything he releases in vinyl, I buy it. I love his work so much and who he is, and I want to support him, an independent artist. And then in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, you really got to buy a turntable, dude. Like, so I do plan to put my
Well,
money where
I'm
my
making a
mouth is.
mental note for a Christmas present for Tony Moss.
It better not take that long. I'm going to get one soon.
Okay.
Well, hearkening what you were saying, the other thing about that is there's more of a commitment in a relationship. When you have to oh, which of the albums am I going to play? That one. You got to take it down and pull it out. Now you're reconnecting with the cover. You got to put it on and you're only going to play one side. So you kind of you're paying attention and eventually you got to come and flip. It's just a whole different relationship
Yeah.
with the music, I think, when it's an LP and something that is not as passive in the background as it would be, as you mentioned, as an algorithm just running.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I will have like dinner parties. People come over and I'll, an hour before the party will start, I'll go into my collection and pull 3 or 4.
Exactly.
And then as I'm starting to put them on and I'm watching people and I'm watching how that selection is affecting the mood and I'm starting kind of more mellow and then bringing it up.
Yeah, totally.
It's so much fun. And I think all of that to put a, exclamation mark on just the power of music and the context, like you said, that moment where it takes you back.
Yeah.
Right. And you referenced in your, in the I Am Life parties and ceremonies that you were having, how people that had been doing medicine ceremonies were coming and having those similar experiences. Like that also speaks to the power of music and community and coming together.
Absolutely. I said earlier we would need to define. People ask me occasionally like what medicine music is because the genre of music that I am releasing into is new and it's called medicine music. And it's important to qualify. I've said this many times. Any music that you listen to that helps you grieve, right? Or brings in some level of insight or understanding into something you didn't have before, or brings you to joy. And if it's in any way, shape, or form healing, it's medicine music. The music in that moment becomes medicine, right? So in that sense, what is medicine music? More specifically, medicine music is actually referring to music that was either written from, inspired by ceremony, or written for ceremony. That's actually what medicine music is in terms of a genre. So back to your question, the thing with Joy is I knew that it would be a medicine album in that all of the lyrics came from those spaces for sure. And I also didn't want to be confined by anybody's notion about what that is. I think people think that are in the world of medicine music, they think of it as only music that you could play in ceremony, and that's absolutely not true. I'm like, no, I know for a fact it's not true because of the responses that I've gotten. I would definitely, there's a few songs on Joy that, would definitely pass the ceremony test. Like they would be appropriate for that sensitive space. And there's a couple that absolutely would not be. I'm completely fine with that.
Yeah.
It's still medicine music because that's where it was written from.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the guests and features that you have,
Yeah.
right? One, for me, most notably would be Stanley Clark.
Amazing.
Amazing. And then we have Xenia
Yeah.
Luki, who's part of Bird Tribe, and she also has her own music that she's released. She has a song Atman that's
Amazing.
just blows your socks off. And then you mentioned his name, and I don't know that I can
Oh,
pronounce it.
Fabiano.
Yes, Fabiano. So that, yeah, how did that come together? Those are people that did you have them in mind as you were writing the songs, or just kind of comes together?
So yeah, Ksenia, and some Ksenia.
Yep.
It's funny. I think you know how the Russians are that they're so over trying to get you to say their name, right? They will say it in the way that they think you can say it.
Okay.
So when I first met her, I was like, "How do you say her name?" And she goes, "Ksenia." I'm like, "With a K?" She goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Ksenia." She goes, "That's good."
It's like whatever.
So it's Ksenia. Ksenia Luki. I was at a ceremony quite some years ago, and I was facilitating, and this friend came over and said, "There's that girl there, Ksenia. She's an amazing musician. You should really let her play a song." And oftentimes when it happens, it's like, "Oh boy, here we go,"
Here we
know.
go.
So I have this section, community sharing time.
Right.
Sometimes otherwise known as difficult listening hour.
Open mic, here we go.
Yeah. And she, grabs the guitar and she takes off singing this song, Velo con el Viento. And I was like, who is this girl?
Yeah.
And so we just hit it off immediately. And then the funny thing is, she later told me that during that ceremony, she's like, friends had told her about Bird Tribe, and the level of musicality and so forth. And she goes, yeah, I was sitting in the ceremony. And she's like, I don't know who these people are, but I want in. Right? And within a year that happened, So we just became, it's one of the coolest things, I mentioned this last night. I think, biggest things to be grateful for in my life is to be friends with musicians that you love and appreciate so much as artists, and we all geek out on each other all the time. We're always telling each other, like, it's so cool that we're friends because we love each other's artistry so much.
Yeah.
It is a really cool thing. It really is. Yeah, so that's how we actually met in the ceremony context. Fabiano do Nascimento is a Brazilian guitarist. He sings, I think, beautifully, but that's not the music he puts out. It's always instrumental. He, particularly in Sam Gandel, they do this really beautiful, I don't even know what to call it. It's like experimental jazz, sometimes Brazilian. They're just musicians, We also met in the context of ceremony, became friends. I went to Brazil to study with someone really popular there, and he was there playing music. And so we just kind of kept bonding. And then, interesting thing about the song on the album is called Said. Fabiano has a song called Tupi, one of his earlier works. And it was just one of my favorite pieces of music. It's just this really simple, short guitar kind of riff that he's playing with, that he's sort of kind of singing in the background of. And this one night, I was lying in bed. It's like 3 a.m. And I said the lyrics to it. So I contacted him the next day. I recorded it on my phone, sent it to him, and I said, hey, I'm going to be launching into this album project. And that was the first song. I go, how would you feel about me doing a version of this song with lyrics, and we'll kind of shift it? And he wrote back right away, absolutely, I love it, So that just became what is known as Set on the album. And the beautiful thing was we got to bring him into the studio and relay down the track to fit the new arrangement that Johnny created. So that's where that happened. And I'm just so honored because I love he and Ksenia so much as artists. So to have them on this album is like over the moon, right? Stanley Clarke I had not met, but if anybody knows who Stanley Clarke is, in my reference earlier to that period of my life of like Parliament Funkadelic and everything in that world, we are in the studio with Stanley Clarke, and I'm pitching myself because he's telling us stories on breaks of like Bootsy Collins, and all these people he's worked with, and Chick Corea, and so for someone like me, he was one of those people like I didn't know who he was by name at the time. Stanley Clarke didn't mean anything to me, but the music that he was making and who he was and what he represented was in my world and my field. So in wanting to bring these genres together, I remember we were talking in the studio one day about this one track, and Johnny has worked, my producer, Jonathan Hakakian, he had worked with Stanley on several projects. And what happened was apparently there's a song on the album, the last track called Forever, had a major string arrangement on it. And he sent it to Stanley just for some consultation on some string part. And he basically really liked what he heard, which eventually led to Johnny saying, as a matter of fact, since you like Tony's voice, blah, 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 would you be interested or down to play bass on couple of tracks? And he said yes.
Wow.
And that's how that happened. And yeah, to be at his home studio and have, he's sitting there being Stanley Clark playing, and I'm hearing my friggin' voice on this thing. And that was this moment I was like, how did this happen? Right? Yeah.
Well, you're very humble. I think the talent speaks for itself. I am in love with the lyrics that you've put together. Some of my first impressions were how they loop back onto each other, and they're sort of self-referential. Can you explain that a little bit more? Give me an example.
In terms of it being a concept album, that's one of the things that makes it that. Oftentimes, musicians will do this in general, but particularly in ceremony context. Let's say I've done Grateful, and because Grateful is like a central theme of the ceremony, I'm later doing, like you've heard, we're doing a Hong piece, and I'm singing, please don't walk up on this road without telling everyone you know how much you love them so. Forever grateful, yeah. So the kind of message would keep looping back. Or something that Diana Carr, another amazing musician, something that Diana had sung earlier would land in my consciousness in that moment, and I realized, oh, that really ties in with the meaning of this song. So I would add it. So I wanted to do that with the album. These completely distinct tracks throughout the album. I don't know how often it happens, probably at least 4 or 5 times. The lyrics start to kind of loop back in each other. And if you're listening, like I said, from beginning to end, it's really a beautiful experience because you're listening. The place where it shows up in the album most, the first single we released is Infinite Colors. And at the very end of that, wrap those loving arms around me. Those are actually the lyrics from the song that happens later in the album. The one that I wrote kind of for my ancestors, the Stovall sisters. Yeah, but in a completely different context. So one is like banjo, the idea and feeling for me was like sitting on the edge of the Mississippi River with homies, and then this song just comes out. Because that's the way it feels and felt like to me when I wrote it. And that was kind of honoring the ancestors. But in Infinite Colors, we give it an electronic dance facelift, basically. Yeah, so there's several places where that happens. Like you'll hear little parts of lyrics. The title song for the album is Joy, first track, I believe, on the album. And then later we wanted to honor this psychedelic ayahuasca world. There's a song called Trees that the song before it is called Been There. And the lyrics were from a psychedelic, well, I shouldn't say psychedelic. It's from a plant medicine experience I had in Peru, where these kind of like gangster looking, OG characters show up black, and they're like, oh, there you are. We've been wanting to work with you. And I was like, whoa, you guys are like the devil. They're like zoot suit looking. And I was like, I am fully tripping, right? But later in their ceremony, the medicine was like, no, you misunderstood. And then this download came of like, what they're saying is for Joy to work, your concept of this album, the soul needs to be the through line. You need to make sure that the soulful aspect of your musical and artistic ancestry is front and center. That was absolutely true, and I hadn't thought about it, to be honest. I just really hadn't placed it in that context. I'm like, oh, that is the main through line for this whole thing, is bringing all of those things through this particular kind of lens and perspective. So, because that song, Been There, came out of that experience, and we were on a dieta, a diet, we call it, a concentrated 2 weeks of working with ayahuasca in Peru with a teacher. And the plant that I was working with is called Nuyarao. It's a tree, and it's called Tree of Light. And you diet a specific plant, like meaning you're only having ayahuasca ceremonies, and then you're also drinking a concoction herbal from this particular plant. And the idea is that you're building a relationship with the plant teacher aspect of this plant. Yeah, that's a very simplified version of what's happening. So it was called Tree of Light. So after they'd been their song, I thought, okay, we have to honor this psychedelic plant medicine journey experience. And if it's only going to be one track on this album, it's this one. And that's what Trees is. Yeah, Johnny did a really beautiful job of like, yeah, so it goes from this kind of funk, almost like, again, Parliament Parliament Funkadelic-ish song, and then tree, and then right away, like, uh-oh, yeah, and you're journeying. But in that, we start looping back. You bring me joy, you bring me, and it's kind of to remind everybody that, yeah, you're still on this same journey that you
Yeah.
started the album with. That was kind of the idea. It's just now it's over here, and now it's over here, and now
Yeah.
it's gone into the world of jazz, and now it's
Well, and the lyrics kind of keep you rooted in the journey, right? And then it allowed you to kind of expand the musical palette and
Yeah.
yeah. So I got to meet Johnny for the first time last night,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
clearly he's extremely talented. How long have you guys been working together?
Oh, geez. I don't even know how long ago it was. The kind of experiment to me wanting to record music professionally was a song called Sunflowers and Wood. I didn't record it because I thought it was like going to be this hit song. It was just one of the first songs that I ever wrote. And I kind of wanted to honor it and just kind of jump into the world of recording, at least on the next level for me. And I met Johnny at Burning Man through some other friends. They have friends because you got to meet Jonathan, you're going to love him, and we met and we connected. We worked on this Love Amp project, just simple, like literally kind of a home recording album. And eventually that built into Sunflowers and Wood. And I think that might have been 7 years ago,
Wow.
something like that. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about last night about trust and having a collaborator help you bring something to your vision to life, and delivering vocals and demos, and then having, giving
Yeah.
him like an idea and an inspiration, but then coming back and there being, him adding his own flavor. How has that been?
It's an amazing process. As you heard me share last night, I think a lot of artists, younger ones certainly that I've met, I don't think they fully understand the role of producer. I think they think the producer is more of an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're just going to come into the studio and he's going to make sure they sound good. And you might get a producer like that. But the idea of the producer, no, that's the engineer's job, right?
Mm-hmm.
The producer's job is to actually help you bring this vision to life, to flush it out, to expand on it, to kind of push your boundaries. Thought, what about this? Try this, try this, That's where the trust comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You're also, because as an artist, you don't always actually know. We think we do. And I have definitely learned that I don't always know. What you think is the best treatment for or direction for a particular song. Because we all have a very fairly limited scope, that we're kind of creating in. And a producer, a good one can just kind of listen and be like, I know you wrote that as a fast thing, but I think we should slow it down. And you're like, no, you're crazy. No, I'm not. That happened several times with Johnny. I took one of the songs that I love most on the album is called Coming Down for a lot of different reasons. And I sent it to him, fast paced. We were born from the trouble of the road. He's like, let's slow it down, So he puts on this tempo and I'm sitting there in the studio and, if I've ever been untrue, if I've ever hurt or made you cry. And I suddenly realized at that tempo, the song became about the lyrics. It was really about this heartfelt, probably in a lot of ways, most honest thing in terms of personal, intimate experience that I'd ever written. And he just had the good insight and instincts that this song really needs to be about that. So to bring the two together is the thing about a producer. The song starts with kind of just the voice, this beautiful, very simple, minimalist kind of underscoring. And as it moves along, it picks up. And by the end, you're actually up dancing. It's a dance track. So he was able to combine what my original vision was while also turning it into something that I just didn't, that makes it much more powerful, basically, and much more honest. Yeah. Yeah. So there's the trust factor, Yeah, sometimes he'd say, slow it down. Sometimes let's speed it up. He's like, oh, I really think you want big, like the other example was Living Planet. I didn't even want it on the album because I just didn't think it would work, right? It didn't sound like anything else. I sing it a cappella as more of a prayer. And he's like, well, let's try this. And I said, okay, well, let's do it with a drone. He told this story last night. So I'm like, okay, drone, that great, that works. He's like, well, I'm kind of wondering if we added a guitar. This kind of kept going, right? I'm hearing some strings, and by the end, as you know, we put these little cards out last night. We asked people like, what was your favorite song you heard of the top three? And on every single card, Living Planet was on it.
Yeah.
So again, it was this beautiful synergistic trust that Johnny and I have in each other, because it works the other way too. He'll do something, I'm like, no, absolutely not. That's not going to work. Like, right? And what I love about, again, the producer is if you're trusting, the relationship works, the pushback becomes part of the process, never personal. You know, we were working on Joy, the title song, and I had this like, da, 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 and I was convinced that it needed to be this keyboard kind of thing. And he's like, no, a horn section. I'm like, dude, no way. So then we're in the studio, this classic moment, and he plays it, and it comes on. And I'm, trying to be all like fair and listening, and then the song ends, and I go, I fucking hate those horns. Right? And he says, why? I go, because blah, 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 blah. And he's so great. He goes, I disagree. And then he explained why. And I listened to it again. And, by the fourth, it's not just the acclimation process. I realized what I was rejecting was how different it was from my original idea of it, which artists do all the time. Again, this is why your producer is so important. Once I completely let go of what I thought it should sound like, I heard how badass it was to have the horns there.
Yeah, bro, it definitely brings a lot of that song to life.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of, I guess, who I would consider the GOAT of producers would be Rick Rubin. And the reason I bring that up is he's a listener. He has a vast knowledge of just music. And so he's like, kind of what you're saying, like, what if we brought this element in? What if we introduced this reference?
Or take that out.
Yeah, or take this out. So that's really cool. So everyone, we obviously, when this comes out, hopefully the album will be out or not shortly behind it. Take the time to listen to these songs and reference this, because that's the story of just having Living Planet just being a drone.
Yeah.
Is really cool. The other thing that jumps out at me just as you were talking is, and this, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, but you're so positive, right? The name of the album is Joy.
Yeah.
And I think there's I find a lot of artists there's some cynicism in the world.
Absolutely.
And you're putting out what you want the world to be. You're hoping to bring that to life.
You nailed it.
Yes.
My feeling as an artist, and I say often that I am first and foremost an artist, meaning I'm like by evolution. My just natural way of viewing and interacting with the world is as an artist, as I understand what one is. You're always kind of deconstructing and deep looking and just walking around, even town, and, you might be sitting on a bus bench. And for me, I look up and I look at, wow, the aesthetics of that telephone pole. Like, that's friggin' beautiful. And the composition around it, that's just natural for me. And I think a lot of people do it. They just may not have the language for it in that context. So artists first, first of all, everything in my life comes through that lens to some degree. I feel like it is in the process of creativity that I'm kind of mostly aligned with whatever the universe is up to, basically. Yeah, it's just kind of second nature.
Yeah. When I think about Living Planet, you're right. We're in this dire moment, really. I mean, if we look at it, and we have to do something, and so I could see a take on that where it's like, you have to do something, get out there, and there would be a challenge there. But you're just speaking to the beauty of this planet and the life.
And at the same time, the lyrics are, if all the world knew freedom now, it's posing a question, right? If all the world knew justice now, if all the world, peace, it's not giving an answer, and it's not pointing a finger. It's simply saying, like, the lyrics are, all the joy within our hearts would be so free to soar, which is true. One of the things that fascinated me, as I spoke earlier about being someone who was just from an early age really interested in and fascinated by the whole nature of our existence. If you are at all in that world, the thing that always baffles you is why the entire history of humanity, as far as we know, is riddled with war and conflict and like horrific inhumanity, to ourselves. And you're always trying to wrap your head around that, right? And understand it. So as an artist, for me, getting back to what you're pointing at, there's plenty of artists that are singing about appropriately and sharing about the cynicism and giving the warnings and the challenges. I just happen to be one that's wanting to also bring in the joy and elation and the beauty of life, because that's why we're questioning all those things, right? It's because everybody is entitled to that, wants it, realizes how valuable it is. So in the midst of all the crazy, as we're recording this, I mentioned last night, I heard 33 wars raging on the planet, which is mind-boggling in and of itself, because only like the pop star wars get into our
Right.
news feed.
Right.
Meanwhile, there's suffering on a mass scale everywhere. I feel like I pay attention to that. I bow down to that in terms of like not flinching. And at the same time, that what I want to contribute to the world is more joy and love and gratitude. That's just who I am. So why not? That's my particular piece. Needless to say, I'm not the journalist, but I don't remember now where it was, but it was from a reputable source. And that basically it was that. It said there's like 33 wars raging on the planet right now. We're only hearing about the most quote unquote popular ones in terms of media exposure. They go, but by the way, 22 of them we're involved in one way or another.
Wow.
And this is something that, I often say Western capitalism, as it's not in concept, people need to make the distinction, but as it is actually lived in practice.
Right.
And in some ways is the most advanced prison ever created because you don't know you're in it, right? Yeah, it is. The way it has permeated and in some ways become our culture, in the most simplified version and layman's version of this possible, as we know, the whole thing is driven by scarcity and by people feeling that they're competing, and that your personal happiness and personal gain and personal accumulation of stuff is the driving force of your life, and you are competing with other people to get it, and you deserve it, right? Like, and through reinforced through social media, and in some ways all of that's kind of innocuous and doesn't really matter, but at the same time, as an entire cultural kind of ethos, of course it matters, right? And because of that, we are kind of designed to tune out. I don't think biologically, because you can't walk around with all of it, we're kind of designed to tune out the things that aren't in our immediate field in terms of survival. But that gets reinforced on a massive scale through, pop culture, capitalism, consumerism. Yeah, so I think when you actually kind of, those moments when you can bring your attention to the uncomfortable messiness of life and become aware that there's 33 wars and that our country is involved in 22 of them, that's a very sobering moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people would think that, like, well, that's just like a downer. I'm like, actually, it's liberation in this sense. When you really get and you're paying attention to the realness, right, of the world, I said the messiness aspect of it, right, then your life really becomes valuable. Like, life becomes really valuable to you. You don't take take for granted things like friendship and shelter, and just being able to sit across from a friend and have conversation in a safe and beautiful environment, right? It actually brings you into the gratitude and brings you into the joy. And I chose joy because joy is distinct from happiness and gratitude. Joy is usually something on the other side of pain and suffering. That's why the album is in sun and moon, the duality of the colors, the way I play with them. Joy is usually something that most people experience from life experience, right? Happiness, is happy.
Right.
Joy is much deeper. And I feel that it is a thing that people feel when burdens and challenges are either met or lifted, right? I can't. It's one of those things again that you can't really qualify, but people know joy when they feel it. I think Keanu Reeves, who I just love, said something like that. Somebody asked him a question about like how his life was with his brother passing or something, and he says something to this effect like, I don't need to be happy to enjoy life, right? And I was so struck by that because that's really deep, profound understanding of the richness of living. It doesn't require constant happiness, right? to actually be fully immersed in and appreciate with gratitude the human experience.
And the confusion of that, like the feeling like, oh, I need to always be happy.
Oh, yeah, it's
is
like
kind of a
something that
fool's
I should be
errand.
pursuing.
Right.
Yeah. It's like just being present
Yeah.
and being fully accepting of the whole rich tapestry of our existence. Deep joy comes from that. And that's
Yeah.
again like the distinction, you know. So that's why I chose that. I remember thinking like, well, I've talked about grateful, I've sung about it, released a song about it. What would be like the thing I'd want to share? And it just came to me like, oh, joy. Yeah, because what people would share very oftentimes in ceremonies, good kind of closure point for, as we're probably moving towards the finishing line here. The thing that people would often share at the end of ceremony or as their intention in the beginning of it was this experience of joy. That after this whole cathartic release had happened, you know, like they had faced their demons or faced, you know, things happening in the world, their trauma, their past transgressions, whatever it is. And then there's the initial fear of it happening, then all the uncomfortableness of it, this is never gonna end. And then finally they're gonna like in one way or another purge it out, right? And then when they go, but then I just moved into blissful joy. Joy, joy, joy. And I'm like, yeah, that's totally it, right? On the other side of all of that is actually what you're wanting, right? And you're also grateful for the pain and suffering, and not the pain and suffering that other people are experiencing,
Yeah.
right? The pain and suffering of your own life that has brought you to this, yeah, kind of like triumphant crescendo moment of realizing that despite all of that, life is beautiful and you're still here and you love it.
I mean, you're talking a lot about life experience. I think the depth of your pain and suffering to some extent allows you to feel greater joy and happiness.
It's one of those kind
Expands
of
your
paradoxes that suck, right? But they're true. Right? Well, this duality, it's like, yeah, because there is pain and suffering, there is joy and gratitude.
yeah.
Right. And because there's darkness and shadow, yeah, there's light and, you know, revelatory, yeah, awareness. And yeah, I think it's one of the most challenging things that we confront on a mystic / spiritual path of self-exploration is at some point, because there's a part of you that fights it, there is this point when you realize you have to embrace paradox. Not only paradox, you have to embrace duality. At some point, you just have to accept, like, harkening back to my earlier question about why all this pain and suffering, it's because it is. Because without it, you wouldn't have the other thing. I'm like, but that sucks. Like, it's still what it is.
We also got to see Infinite Colors music video,
Yeah.
which I thought was beautifully shot. You want to talk about that?
I'm really not into the music video format for so many different reasons. Because so much pressure is placed on it, you know, and people are like, end up judging your music by whether or not they like this video. And like, you know, so yeah. But I knew we wanted to release at least one, you know, as just an extension of the artistic expression of the album. So in the community, in the world, I would say, you know, Western culture, there's a lot of conversation happening around this idea of toxic masculinity at the time. You know, we think we bantered around that too at one point. And, you know, which is a real thing, of course. But at the same time, I was like, but I know so many like very, you know, masculine men in my life who are not toxic at all. Yeah, you being one, right?
Thank you.
You know, I thought, well, we also want that in the conversation, like what it looks like to be healthy masculine and in relationship, right relationship with nature and the feminine. So that was the inspiration for that video. The video is basically I chose Andrew, who's featured in the video. He's one of these guys, he's like beautifully masculine, you know, and a hunk of a guy, you know, and I called him, I said, I want to shoot a video that is about you going into nature and having a spiritual, sensual experience with nature itself, right? And he's like, I'm all about it, I'm on board. So that's where the video happened. And, you know, kind of theatrical. Yeah, him having an authentic, which he was. That's why we shot it in the way we did. It's at the Yuba River. Yeah, and he sets up a little altar there. And the idea is that nature in the form of light, because the lyrics are about light, kind of basically shows up for him and enters him. And he's just in this beautiful, sensual dance with it. And in the end of it, kind of like baptizes himself in the water and is kind of reborn. but through just nature itself with no intermediary. So that's the idea of the video.
Thank you for the context, because I couldn't quite put into words. It was sensual.
Yeah.
And he starts to disrobe, and as a straight white man, there wasn't anything, like homosexual about it. It was
No,
just
not
this
at all.
man experiencing this moment and just the beauty of being connected to nature. So
Yeah, when we were shooting, and Pavel and I talked about that, I said, it needs to be sensual because that's the point, but it's not homoerotic and it's not sexual. There's a difference.
yeah,
And that's why we chose Andrew. He really understands that and kind of is that as a person. Yeah, and so several places in the video you see where he's like touching the trees and it's really like feeling the water. We knew that was going to be important for people to understand that what he was feeling was sensual, but it was with nature.
yeah. And I think I talked about my maybe confusion with religion and spirituality, and I think that comes back to maybe there's confusion with sexuality and sensuality.
Oh yeah,
and these things that are sort of next door to each other, but they're different.
very,
And
they don't necessarily, meet
yeah.
often, depending.
Wow. Well done. Yeah, I'm so excited to hear it and see it come out in its entirety. What a pleasure to sit down with you today, and I respect and admire you so much, and I look forward to more adventures and learning in the future.
Yeah, me too, man. Thank you so much for this. It's beautiful just to be able to sit, particularly after last night.
Yeah.
People hearing the album for the first time and just be able to kind of dive into a little bit of its context. So thank you.
Anything else that you want to talk about or hit on? We can even just take a moment to.
No, I mean, the thing I think that I like to share often these days is what I brought up already. There are some people, when they see that the music that I'm releasing is under the genre of medicine music, they see it as this challenge that I'm saying other music is not. And I've already said, that's not true. Any music can be medicine for you at a particular moment in your life. But medicine music for us is music that was inspired by and born out of psychotherapeutic, psychedelic, or plant medicine work, or was created for it, right? That's the world that I live in. So naturally, that's where I'm creating from.
Yeah.
And to a large degree, for. Yeah.
Well, for anyone listening, I invite you to really listen to the album front to back and dive in deep. Read the lyrics, enjoy that. And Tony, thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
again.
you.
Same.